Good morning and Sabbath peace to you in the name of Yeshua, our Messiah. As we continue in the book of Deuteronomy, making progress. Had some fun discussions last week. So we are continuing, where do we live off? Chapter 14. So once again, remember, these are Moses' last words, his dying words, if you will. He's only got 5 weeks before God takes him away. Whether he literally dies or he was Elijah'd up into heaven. It says that he was buried, but nobody knows where. God buried him. But this is it. This is his last chance to talk to the 2.5 million Israelites that he has been leading for 40 years. And they are about to cross the Jordan River and go into the Promised Land. What do you say if you have 5 weeks to live? And so we left off in chapter 14, and we're in verse 21. I thought we got this far last week, but as I was looking at it, I realized we didn't get these two little verses. Actually, it's one verse, but two comments. Verse 21 says, "You shall not eat anything that has died naturally. You may give it to the sojourner who is within your towns, that he may eat it, or you may sell it to a foreigner. You are a people holy to the Lord your God." Now, this passage is sometimes used to say, look, there is a difference. There's commands for the Gentiles, there's commands for the Israelites, the people of God. And to some degree, that's correct. But what if a Gentile, what if someone who's not an Israelite decides, hey, I want to worship the God of Israel? Well, in my opinion, all the commands to Israel now apply to that Gentile. So why is it that Israel can't eat a goat or a sheep that was killed by a wild animal or died of old age? What's the reason that's given here? What does holiness mean? Set apart. Set apart. So you are set apart to me. And one way that I want this distinction to be made is you can't eat an animal that's been killed by another wild animal, died of old age, died because it fell off a cliff and died. But you may let somebody else eat it who does not worship me. Is that pretty clear? So it'd be similar to why are there some commands for the priests that don't apply to the non-priests? Why are there commands for the Levites that don't apply to the non-Levites? And in the same way, why are there commands that are going to apply to Israelites but not to the foreigner who is just traveling through or sojourning in the land of Israel? And again, it's because there's a statement of set apartness. The Levites are set apart. The priests are set apart. And then the same way, even, dare I say, the common Israelite is set apart from the non-believer or non-worshiper of Yahweh, of Yeshua. All right, any? Caden?
Okay, really quick. There is like a heightened geographical locality language here with sojourner and your towns and foreigner.
Yeah.
Does that mean this is related to animals in the land of Israel, and those outside those towns wouldn't have those laws? Is that a bad reading of the text?
Yeah, I don't think that's true. I'm thinking he's saying you belong to me regardless of where you are. Please don't eat an animal. Sure. In the same way, you could say we got the passage that says, when you come into the land and you have someone who talks to the dead. Well, does that mean that when you leave the land, you could talk to the dead? All right. Good. All right. Someone else? All right. Russ?
Yeah, I would say, when there's leadership, like the Levites had certain standards, even like who they could marry, right? And it seems like there's a higher standard when there's leadership. in the New Testament, I think James says that, if someone desires to be a leader or a teacher, they have a stricter judgment too. And so there's higher standards to kind of, not that everybody has to meet those standards, but it's like if you want into leadership, there is a calling. All Israel was supposed to be priesthood, but they kind of disqualified themselves at Mount Sinai. The Levites went up there with Moses, and all of a sudden they become the tribe of leadership and service to the Lord. But the long-term calling is that all his holy people are to reach this level of standards that he wants of holiness. And it's kind of like taking steps, baby steps, and getting closer to him. And even with food that, like an animal, well, you can give it to a sojourner, but I don't want you eating it. But it's kind of showing his will. And the standards get higher as you get closer to him, even whether it be the temple and, certain blood can't be there, uncleanness can't be there. But as we get closer to him, whether it be leadership or just getting closer to him in any way, he does have higher standards.
Yeah, I think the key is what you said at the end. If we're talking about the Levites and the priests, it has to do with proximity to the temple. You can have leadership, high leadership in Israel where the commands don't apply, such as the king, such as the judge, such as the elders in the towns. But when it comes to proximity in the temple, now you do have extra stipulations. Although there's even a command for the king, right? You have to write out your own law and such. So good. All right, Cheryl.
So this question just popped in my head because of how society talks about obedience. There are people that say that, well, actually it's probably phrased wrong. Abba created everybody. So we are all his children. Now,
Yes.
all of us are obedient to him, so we're not all covenanted. So how do you explain to people that read that passage and go, well, I guess he only cares about half the people he created? So I'm just asking.
Oh, right. So, okay, good. So the idea here is those who belong to me. So you can't just, if you want to talk as an outsider, if somebody from the land of Moab came along and said, well, I worship, can't remember the name of the Moabite god right now, but I just want to, throw darts at you and say, well, look, your God doesn't like me because of this verse right here. Even the Moabite would have to say, well, I am set apart to my Moabite God, and there's rules for me. So I think that actually they would understand this. Now, I mean, today's day and age, that may not fly. But God is saying, those who worship me, those who belong to me, these are the rules. And again, the word holy means set apart. You're set apart to me, and this is the way I want it expressed. Okay, let's go to the next verse. We're still only in one verse, but the second half of that verse says something really funny if you've never heard of it before. But God gives this instruction that says, you shall not boil a young goat in its mother's milk. Now, have you guys heard this verse before? Yeah, this is not actually the only place in the Bible where this verse is stated. It's in Exodus, and I think it's also in Leviticus. But what does it mean, and why does God say that? Now, today you guys know that modern-day Jews will say, you just can't cook dairy and meat, eat dairy with meat. And that's what God meant here. Don't mix your meat with your dairy. It's going to create indigestion. Is that what God is talking about? And I would say, no, it's a much, much stronger statement. There's a much stronger teaching that we should be taking away from this. It doesn't say, don't cook a goat in milk. What does it say? It's mother's milk. Because there's a desecration here of motherhood, of parenting, if you will. Yeah, let's see. In Deuteronomy 22, we're going to come here in several weeks, but it talks about if you come across a bird that's on a nest and has eggs, and do you guys remember this passage? It says you can eat what? The eggs and not the bird. And we'll talk about that, but I think it's the exact same teaching. But don't use that which nurtures the baby against the baby. So in this case, the mother's milk is supposed to grow a child, but instead you take it and you make it perhaps the cause of death. You're cooking it, a young goat or sheep or whatever you want to do in its mother's milk. There's a message there. This is not a dietary restriction. I guess technically it is, but there's a much deeper message here that we're supposed to understand. And again, when we get to the eggs and the mother bird, we're going to talk about how the mother bird is not abandoning the nest, right? You go after a bird, it could just fly away and you miss it. But when there's a nest, the bird tends to hang around trying to scare you away. And so you get multiple opportunities to get the bird, and then you get the egg. And so you're using the mother's protective nature against it to slaughter it and kill the eggs. And God says, do not do that. It is not good. Okay, let's talk about tithing. And whenever somebody comes to church and the topic is tithing, you always start looking around saying, oh, great, where's the offering plate? Of course, if you've been here for a while, you know that's not what this is about. Let's read it. Verse 22. You shall tithe all the yield of your seed that comes from the field year by year. And before the Lord your God, in the place that he will choose to make his name dwell there, you shall eat the tithe of your grain, of your wine, and of your oil, and the firstborn of your herd and flock, so that, that you may learn to fear the Lord your God always. So, what do you tithe, according to this passage? I mean, does anybody here have herds and flocks? Sheep, goats? I mean, there's a couple. Okay. It's not entire. I mean, we live a little bit in agrarian society, so it's not too surprising if one or two of you do. But here he's saying you tithe from your sheep, your goat, your oil. What kind of oil is he talking about? Your olive oil. So you have an olive orchard. And then what else do you say? Your seed. So if you have fields of grain. And your wine. Yeah. So what does the word tithe mean? 10%. 10%. So 10% of your increase. So if you have a herd of goats and they have babies, you give 10% as a tithe. Same with your olives, etc. But what do you do? How do you spend that tithe according to what we just read? Don't bring your goat to Pastor Eric. It says that you eat it. The tithe, according to right here, doesn't go to anyone else but yourself, but where and how? Did you guys catch it? Before the Lord your God, in the place that he will choose to make his name dwell there, you shall eat of it, etc. So where do you eat it? At the temple, at the tabernacle, at the place. So you don't get just take it and eat it or however, wherever you want. He says, come to my house and celebrate with me. And eventually it was at Jerusalem. But let's say you live up in Nazareth. Verse 24, if the way is too long for you, so that you are not able to carry the tithe when the Lord your God blesses you, because the place is too far from you, which the Lord your God chooses to set his name there, then you shall turn it into money and bind up the money in your hand and go to the place that the Lord your God chooses and spend the money on whatever you desire. Now, how many churches have you gone to that teach you to spend your money on whatever you desire as your tithe? And then he gives some examples. You could buy an ox, you could buy a sheep, you could buy some wine or strong drink. And then it says, whatever your appetite craves. And the word in Hebrew there for appetite is nephesh. What does nephesh mean? Yeah, okay, appetite, obviously. But also, it's the word for soul. So whatever your soul craves. But as we're going to find out on Day of Atonement here later in September, it's the same word for appetite. So once you buy whatever you crave, it says, it continues, you shall eat there before the Lord your God and rejoice, you and your household. So you, your family, it's the cause of celebration. So to help you get in your heart into a state of celebration, festivity, excitement, you have a feast. You buy whatever you enjoy eating, and the money's already set aside. You have no choice. It's this 10% of your income, and how much food can you eat when it's 10% of your income? In other words, it's a great celebration. So we look at this passage frequently, and I would invite you to highlight it, write it down, that a portion of your tithe, Eric says, so be clear, this is Eric talking, up to a third of your tithe is to be spent on yourselves during the Moedim, during the appointed times during the year to celebrate the high Sabbath. Springtime, it's going to be Passover, the week of unleavened bread, first fruits, and then we got the one day called Pentecost or Shavuot. That's usually in June. And then we got the autumn holidays for Feast of Tabernacles, not Day of Atonement, and Day of Trumpets. And so he wants you to celebrate those special days. We're going to again talk about those in a couple weeks. And this is how he facilitates you getting into the spirit, the heart, the attitude of celebration. Buy whatever you want for the purpose of celebrating. What do you guys think about that? You like it? You love it. Okay. It also makes it really easy to save up. Like I said, when we do our church camping trip at Tabernacle, that you get to use a portion of your tithe. In other words, it's not really your money anymore because you've set apart 10%, and a portion of that up to a third can be spent on the camping trip. Okay, I heard my name. It was Val.
Where does it say that it's a tenth and then you divide it by 3? Because what I gather
No, there is no Bible verse.
Oh.
That is Eric talking.
Oh.
And I want to be very clear about that.
Okay.
So that there's no misunderstanding. That is Eric. So actually, let's go there. I'm going to finish reading the chapter because it's going to lead up into your question. Verse 27. You shall not neglect the Levite who is within your towns, for he has no portion or inheritance with you. At the end of every 3 years, you shall bring out all the tithe of your produce in the same year and lay it up within your towns. Okay, every 7 years is a sabbatical year. Fancy word is Shemitah. And every 7 years is a Sabbath for the land. So if we count to 7, count to 7, count to 7. In there, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then the Shemitah. So what this is saying is on the 3rd year and the 6th year, you bring out your tithe for the poor and for the Levite, verse 29. And the Levite, because he has no portion or inheritance with you, and the sojourner, the fatherless, the widow, who are within your towns, shall come and eat and be filled, and the Lord your God may bless you in all the work your hands do. Okay, so what we just read, tithing goes to Levites, yourself to celebrate the Moedim, the appointed times, and the poor. Now, the way that the Talmud, which is not scripture, interprets this is going to scare you, 3 10%. What does that equal? 30%. In my opinion, you don't have to. So 10% to the Levite. They call that the first tithe. The second tithe is to yourself to celebrate the Moedim. And there's a third tithe to the poor. So that would bring your total to 30%. Now, where some disagree with that, and I'm talking about the Jews, is they'll say that the second tithe and the third tithe can alternate years, so that there's never 30%, but there's 20%. But there's always the 10% for the I'll just say the synagogue, the leadership in their minds. And then on the Moedim years, it's on yourself, the second tithe. Hopefully this is all making sense to you guys. And then the third year comes along, now it's for the poor. You switch it from the Moedim for yourself to the poor, and then same thing with the 6th year. I don't see that in this passage. He's talking about buy whatever your appetite craves to spend on yourself, and you shall eat there before the Lord your God and rejoice in your household, and don't neglect the Levite. In other words, the idea of share with them. And I read this as all being part of the same tithe. I think because the word tithe means 10%, it's only 10%. I think at some point the rabbis said we got to make sure we get our 10%. And then we have additional 10% for these other areas, but we got to make sure. But I don't see that. And I never see in the Bible where it says tithe for the Levites. In addition to that, a tithe for the poor. In other words, I don't see clarification. Now, I see a lot of hands. Salvador.
Hebrew or the Greek, is there, I know you said what you just said, is there, just like the word love in Greek,
Yeah.
you have agape, philo, eros, tithe, and this context.
Yeah.
Does it say it any different in Hebrew and or
No,
Greek?
I don't think so. Caden can clarify, but I think it's all the same word and it just means 10%. Yeah. Okay, Cheryl?
Okay, so you know where I'm going with this.
Yes.
Because I am one of those that does believe it is actually 30%, but it's only 30% in the third and the sixth year. So the reason I'm mentioning that is because we've done this one time where we were trying to figure your method and taking a 10% and then splitting it three ways and trying to be able to support the teachers, to do the feast, to do the poor. It just doesn't work financially. You're just not saving enough. Josephus agrees with me. It is 30%.
Yep.
I actually do see this as actually a feast fund passage because it does state, as you said, before Adonai your Elohim, in the place that he chooses to make his name. He doesn't actually command people to go to the place where his name dwells except for during the holy days.
Yes.
So if you were to take this passage and to take the other passages that actually talk about the feast funds, it actually does sync up. I read this, and I've done this study like 5-6 times, and every time I get 30%. Every time.
There are those, obviously, who agree with this. And
Yeah.
what I want you guys to take away from this is that I think there's only 10%. But you are free to give 50, you're free to give 90, you're free to give everything, right?
I think
The idea is what's obligated.
that, was it Malachi that says that you are robbing me?
Yes.
I wonder if this fellowship were to do the other method just for 1 year to see what the result would be, to see if Abba would bless this congregation in the other method. And we wouldn't be going into Sukkot with people going, I can't afford it. Encourage people to just test him in this matter.
Yeah, Cheryl, where it comes down to is what does Scripture require? What does God require?
So
And we can't make the argument emotional. We have to come back to what does it require? And so I would encourage everyone to
but
do
even
their
you
own
said-
study. Do their own study and pray about it and come to their own conviction, but it cannot be imposed on others.
So again, we're back to test him in this matter. Let him reveal what is truth to you.
Okay. Well, I feel like I lost where I was going now. Any other comments or questions about tithing? The three different areas. Eric says 10%, but there are certainly others who say 30%. All right, Russ.
Yeah, just kind of sharing my testimony. I grew up in a church that interpreted it that way. It was 20% every year, 10% for all the feasts, because there, in those ancient times, it was a pilgrimage 3 times a year. And even Yeshua, remember, he gets left behind when he's 12 years old. And so they did a lot of traveling when they could get to Israel. But so to make it feasibly possible, the years that I did it, just amazing breakthroughs. And that church grew up to be about 150,000, and there's just testimonies every year, especially on those third tithe years. And so as long as I could do it, and it always takes faith to do it, but there was just amazing, miraculous breakthroughs. But I just came to that conclusion is that, no matter how poor you are, distribute it the way, you're doing it here. That's like the bare minimum. But if you can step out in faith and do it the way she's saying it, do it, because it does bring miracles and blessings and breakthroughs. And by the fruits, test God on these. I would get on my knees every time I sent a tithe, and I said, God, okay, Malachi here. And I would get calls. I had a business at the time. I'd get big contracts. whenever I would do that. So just so many, I encourage everybody to go above and beyond the call of duty whenever they can and step out in faith.
Yeah. One thing to remember is, and I think you guys know this, everything you have doesn't belong to you, right? It belongs to God. So the idea of him asking or commanding, give me back 10%, give me back this much, to test you, to see if your heart will let go of 10%, recognize, and hopefully you recognize, you know what, it's all yours anyway. I shouldn't have a problem tithing 10%. Even, it makes it even easier. It's a third of it's for you anyways to celebrate. Now, what about when you're tithing to we don't really have Levites anymore in priesthood. So like many of you, I tithe to ministries. But what if you give these ministries and they don't use it well? Have any of you thought about that? How many times in the days of the temple, the tabernacle, was the priesthood corrupt? I think of Samuel with Eli and Eli's sons and the wicked things they were doing in the tabernacle, and yet that's still where people were required to bring their tithe. So on the one hand, yes, we need to be careful since we have the freedom now to choose a ministry to give to. On the other hand, at the end of the day, what they do with it's out of your hands. But we just need to make sure we are giving our tithe, at least in my opinion, up to a third of it to ministries to build the kingdom. Any other? Yes, Val. Oh, Bridget.
Wouldn't that be here instead of a different ministry? Wouldn't the 10th go to this church?
Yeah, so you're right. You should give at least a portion of your tithe to the place that is spiritually ministering to you. I don't give all my tithe to this place. I also give to some other ministries. But I also give a significant portion here. So yeah, you should, in my opinion, support the place that is serving you. And just so you guys know, I do not take a salary. It goes to the actual support of the church.
Okay, so I'm trying to wrap my mind around this. So if we take the 10%, and I will start off actually that for the last couple of years, even though I haven't been able to go and celebrate Sukkot, God is faithful and he is good and he has blessed me because I've been taking that 10% and then dividing it the 3 ways. So my question is, well, actually 2. So if I divide it 3 ways, can I do more of a tithe for Sukkot? Because I still, with what I make every month, I'm still coming up so short.
Yeah.
I could probably stay 2 to 3 days at the feast.
So my opinion on that, and I just got to stress opinions here. If we have a 10% tithe, and we do divide into thirds, and if there is a temptation or a need to go beyond the third to celebrate Sukkot, the problem is it becomes your thinking could be tainted in that you're actually giving it to yourself. It's easier to put it in the third for yourself than it is, say, to put it in that third and shrink the third that's for the poor, or shrink the third that's for spiritual leadership. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, I'm not talking about the shrinking though.
Oh,
so what I make every month, I take the 10%, then I divide it the 3 ways.
Okay.
So that's already saved and, paid out. Any additional money can I add into Sukkot?
Can you do more than 10% total?
Yes, without giving.
I mean,
that sounds
do you
so
want me
bad,
to
though,
say
without
no? I
giving-
can't say no. Of course. Yes, of course, God says 10% is just the minimum. If your heart is, similar to Cheryl's, where you're convinced where maybe he wants multiple 10%, or it's like, no, I just want to give because my heart's so in love with you, God, or whatever, and you just want to give extra offerings. Of course yeah.
That's okay to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Michael.
I'm going to preface this just by saying that we do tithe on our income, but technically in this verse, it says to tithe on the seeds of your field and on your flocks and on your grain and on your wine and on your oil and the firstborn of your herds. Nowhere does it say
Money.
Cash, labor. It doesn't say those things. Like, some people tithed of their time and came and painted the church. It looks beautiful. We weren't able to be here, but it's awesome. And thank you for all the people who tithed their time. But again, I think it's right that we tithe of our income in cash, but that's not technically what this passage is talking about, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree with that. And it's a little difficult because it was a very agrarian society, and when you everything is about your crops and your animals, and you tithe on the increase. But if you're a carpenter and you make your living to support your family by working, we don't see instructions here at the beginning of the Bible regarding tithing that. But we do see, when we get to the New Testament, we do see people tithing money at the temple. Well, they don't call it tithe. I shouldn't use that word. We see them giving. Now, whether they consider that tithe or not, it's not stated. But I think it's very important. So here again, I'm going with my opinion. I think it's very important that we do tithe on our income because it really keeps our heart in check to prevent us from, what is that verse where Yeshua says, you cannot serve two masters. You can either serve money or God, but you can't do both. And so it's a good strategy for your spiritual life to say, I will give 10% because I know all of it's yours anyway, and it's good for my heart to see and to know that by doing this discipline. I think we're just going to be stuck on the tithe topic today. All right, Salvador, and then back to Cheryl.
So I heard a sermon this morning, Pastor McClure, San Jose Calvary Chapel, and he was talking about the Gideons, and he talked about how the size, as we know the story of the group of men that were called to go to battle, was from being in the thousands reduced to 300. And he connected that in the sermon to the size of a church. So all in all, what I'm trying to say from this Gideon story, it's not always, especially when we think in the story of the Gideons, who did the fighting?
God.
It was God. It wasn't so, in other words, because of your strengths, because of your numbers, you defeated the enemy. So I think when we do a tithe, especially when we are borderline, how am I going to do this? Is this really out of your own strength?
Yeah.
Or are you stepping out in faith and do as you are told?
Good.
Because I'm going to provide for you. Yeah. I'm going to protect. I'm going to cover your family, your needs.
Yeah.
And yes, it is a test of our faith, of our obedience. It's not always easy, but it is a test of our faith.
Good. Yeah, and that's actually, Cheryl brought up the passage, but the other part in Malachi, God says, he says, test me in this. You don't bring in the tithe. You're wondering why things aren't working right. You're robbing God in chapter 3. Will man rob God? You are robbing me. But you say, how have we robbed you? In your tithes and your contributions. You are cursed with a curse, for you are robbing me, the whole nation of you. Bring the full tithe into the storehouse, that there may be food in my house, and thereby put me to the test, says the Lord of hosts, to see if I will not open the windows of heaven for you and pour down for you a blessing until there is no more need. And then he continues, I will rebuke the devourer for you. So they had pestilence in the land, eating their crops. And he says, I'll get rid of that. And it goes on and on. But he says, test me. You guys don't think you have enough? Just give me 10%. Give me the tithe, and I'm going to bless you. But right now you're stealing from me. So why do you think I'm withholding blessing from you? So yes, thank you, Sal.
Sure.
Okay. So I've seen many people that use the agricultural terms as a excuse to not tithe at all. And they end up going down a trail that is not good. If you really think about it, since the economy has gone down, I have gotten into the habit of when I do grocery shopping, and instead of looking at the cost of the item as saying that this is an item that costs $20, I'm thinking that is an hour's worth of my time.
Yeah.
Yes, they're using agricultural terms, but plants don't grow themselves. They have to be watered, they have to be weeded. He's using agricultural terms, trying to tell people that of the time that you spend in your life to acquire said agriculture goods, said coins, whatever it is, just give me the amount that I'm asking for. So that's one point that I'm making. The other point is it actually does say that if you are too far to a place, you can exchange the goods for silver. So there is money mentioned.
Yes.
So
So Mike's comment was your income doesn't come from crops. It comes from money, like a carpenter. Not that money wasn't involved at all.
yeah. So
Yeah. Okay. Gary?
We look also at the New Testament where Paul takes up collections for the church in
Yeah.
Jerusalem, and he says, they've blessed you spiritually, so you
Yeah.
should at least monetarily bless them as well.
Yeah. Good. So yeah, we talked about that when we went through 1 Corinthians. Was that last year? We see that he says, "Hey, we're taking up a collection. You guys are living way over here in Greece, and but your spiritual foundations down here in Jerusalem, but we should reward them for blessing you guys spiritually." And so he was traveling around Galatia and modern day Turkey and taking up a collection. But what's interesting is he never uses the word tithe. He calls it an offering. But I think there's still the same idea of how connected, how attached are you to your money? You want me just to give away money? And does that hurt? Are you having a hard time letting go? And so I think the idea of the tithe is realize money can come and go, but it all belongs to God. So don't hold on to it tightly. Don't be miserly. Be generous. But yes, the New Testament, Paul, that's called an offering. He doesn't use the word tithe. But good. All right, Russ.
Yeah, when people try to say that the tithing commandment's just agricultural, I try to encourage them to look at the whole Bible, as a context, not just those scriptures like we're going to. I mean, the first person in history is Abraham. He tithed on his spoils, and it's not necessarily agricultural that he worked for, right? And then Jacob comes along, and he's learning his grandson here saying, and he's making this vow because he's afraid of what's coming down the road here. And he's like, whatever you give me, everything I will tithe on. And so Jacob sets this example that, the Levites took on and built upon is whatever the increase. And it is a principle to be applied to whatever generation, whatever culture, whatever the increase is. And when we go to the New Testament, we see that Pharisee who's bragging in his, about being righteous against the sinner. But he's mentioning good things, not like self-righteous things. He says, I do this and I do that, and I tithe on everything you increase. So he uses the same kind of terminology as Jacob does. So we see that it is to be applied, and like we see money as, here's a little hint from our Creator saying, yes, if agriculture isn't enough, you can convert it. Money is a type of tithe. And so I think we have to kind of put things together and see that, we're not an agricultural society, but whatever our increases. And so I think, look at the whole scriptures, not just,
All right. Thank you. This has been a hot topic. Let's go to Val.
I think when I did my research, I agreed with what Cheryl has said. And this type of mentality makes us become better money managers.
Yep.
So we need to become better money managers because money is very tied to spirituality.
Yeah.
It's all over the Bible.
Yep.
And like I tell my husband, I go, we need to, because we're self-employed. So we need to be ultra better money managers, because when you're self-employed and you're not trading time for money, it's more it's different, right? So we need to put money aside for taxes. We need to put money aside for tithing. We need to put money aside for the Moedim now, because we just learned about this about what, babe, 2-3 years ago? So when when I studied this, I was highly convicted. I was like, Lord, I'm not going to rob you. I need to know what you want me to do. In every area, I'm like, I don't want to mess with God. And I think at the end of the day, we don't want to mess with God.
Nope.
So whatever the Lord's put in your heart, like what Cheryl said, that's what's in my heart. And I'm not going to pretend that I'm just like this millionaire, because I'm not. We're not. But what the Lord showed me through scripture is you can trust me. And I have learned, I mean, if you knew my story, I went from like being in debt over $500,000 and honoring God with my money. He delivered me of that $500,000, which I was like, Lord, I don't care how many years I have to work to pay this off. Just forgive me for getting in debt, because being in debt, it's not biblical. We're not supposed to be in debt. So what I have learned is, as the Lord's polished me and changed me and taught me these things, I had to learn to be a better money manager. And the latest thing that I learned, I'm a steward of God's money. This is not my money.
Yeah.
It's his money. And if I'm going to go to the store and I'm going to buy something, I have to identify, would the Lord of my money want me to buy this? And then all of a sudden, I'm like, no, I shouldn't be buying that, right? I shouldn't be doing this with my money. So I am in agreement with what Cheryl, and that's how we've been doing tithing. And what you read earlier, just see the gates of heaven open up and see how much I pour over you. That's how I've seen my life, our lives roll out. It's like, wow, God, I wasn't expecting this. And it's very spiritual. And there's a lot more that goes with that, because the more we withhold, we're actually withholding from the blessing that comes from the Lord, because he's faithful and he's rich.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, he's rich.
Good. All right. Any questions? Questions only. Anyone? Questions about tithing? Is it all absolutely clear now? It's fantastic. Okay.